Hello everyone, friends. Today is an important broadcast, an important forecast. My name is Katya Sergeyevna. I am an astrologer. Today I want to talk about Pluto's station, which has already been active since October 1st and has just started to manifest strongly. And until October 24th, its influence will be quite noticeable. That is, as a rule, this planet is rather tough. It gives quite noticeable events, possibly even crisis situations. These are like points of escalation. Why does this stretch out over 3 weeks? Because the planet is very significant, quite weighty. It moves very slowly both through the sign and through our houses, and even creates long-term trends in prognostics that last for several years. Therefore, accordingly, when it turns around, what is a station? It's a reversal. Now it is coming out of retrograde, and this stationary point, which lasts for 3 weeks, brings heightened eventfulness. But it will be most noticeable specifically from the 9th or 10th to the 15th. If you know where Pluto is moving through your chart, that's where the main events will take place. We need to know exactly where in your transits, in your personal prognostics, Pluto's station is occurring for you. And in this video, that's exactly what I want to talk about today. And not only that, not just about houses, because Pluto can affect more than just houses. The fact that it's moving through a certain house will 100% bring some events, and you probably already know what it is. Maybe the situation has already manifested because Pluto has been in that area of your life for quite some time now, so to speak. But Pluto can also make aspects to certain planets, and that can also create heightened activity or events there. I've never talked about this before, but today I want to make this kind of combo. I'm going to talk about both the houses and the influence on specific planets, what this can bring, what it means in general. For example, if Pluto is moving through a certain house and it's not at a stationary point, meaning it has either just turned retrograde or just come out of retrograde, then it can just be passing through in the background. That is, you don't always feel it. What I mean is, we don't constantly experience these crisis events. We feel the points of escalation. In the stationary phase, Pluto seems to enter a phase of intensification. And the thing is, yes, maybe there was already some problem, you were dealing with it for a certain period of time, then it quieted down, and now it's back again, right? This moment, when it comes back again as a continuation of some story, or when something new starts to unfold, you need to pay attention to it now because it's an entire trend. If you realize that some issue has flared up again, it needs to be resolved now, because Pluto is always about the fact that it's time to be reborn in this story. That is, to change the relationship, to remove what's unnecessary, depending on what the situation requires. Or if you feel that some kind of crisis is approaching, some escalation, something new, you need to understand that this situation could last for a long time. And your task is to figure out where it's all heading, what exactly is going to happen, and what this is really about. Regarding the collective level, Pluto is a very heavyweight planet. It affects each individual, but also the world as a whole, entire countries, politics, and everything that's happening globally. Pluto always deals with themes of power, resources, especially underground resources. It's the effect of nuclear explosions, which is why these issues may be surfacing right now. The topic of things like, terrorist attacks, like something might explode somewhere right now. So it's always about intensity. It's emotional intensity creating a very strong tension in the air. So you might feel this tension in your own life, in some area of your life. And overall, there's tension in the world as well. Not just in Ukraine, not just in some specific country, but there's tension between authorities, everything related to resources as well, resources, money, large structures. And when Pluto goes stationary, it's like it brings up, these crises in politics, in the economy, in various global structures that really make global decisions. Some hidden processes are revealed, secret processes, corruption, certain agreements, hidden connections that existed before. Some secret manipulations start to happen. There's also a reset of power when old models begin to, well, they kind of collapse, right? That is, it can be quite blatant. There might even be some kind of exposure, for example, because Pluto is also the planet of honesty. When some very, very unpleasant truth comes to light, very often Pluto and people in general, even Plutonians, meaning Scorpios or people with a prominent Pluto, work like a scanner. They can very precisely, very sharply, sometimes point out a phrase, so the truth is always hurts the eyes, right? As they say, that's a Plutonian thing, because the real truth is always, well, most often, the truth is very unpleasant, yes. And if Neptune has the quality of, let's say, clouding consciousness more, creating some kind of illusory images, or making you not see something, then Pluto always acts very sharply. The difference between Pluto and all the other planets is that it acts super abruptly. That's why there can be some major scandals, some revelations, possibly some very sharp, highly charged situations when it feels like something is about to explode, like something is about to happen. So, as a rule, it's either a tension that then dissipates, or indeed something actually happens during such periods. Therefore, from October 1st to October 24th, we may witness a situation that either becomes highly charged or is reaching some kind of resolution. Of course, we're talking about the personal level here, meaning the main focus is the house of the horoscope, where this Pluto is transiting. That is, Pluto is currently in the early degrees of Aquarius in the sky. So, in the natal house where you have the first degree of Aquarius, that's where you need to look to see where Pluto is located for you. This is not a forecast based on ascendants. Guys, it's very important when you listen to forecasts by zodiac signs, that doesn't work. That's not it. If you've already seen the video about Pluto station and we're told that if your ascendant or your zodiac sign is Sagittarius, it is by no means guaranteed that Pluto will be in the house that the astrologer is talking about, because the degree in which the planet is located is what matters. This is very important because Pluto moves very slowly, and it might be in the last degrees of a certain house while you're told that it has already moved into another one. The events in your life will depend on this. So you might end up listening to completely irrelevant information and think that none of it applies to your life. That's why I emphasize how important it is to check which degree your Pluto is in. If you don't know, that's okay too. You can write your birth details in the comments. I need the city, the time, and the date, and I'll tell you exactly which degree your Pluto is in. The time is very important again, because without the time of birth, we can't determine the houses, so the time of birth is key. If you know, check it yourself, and let's move on to see where the spotlight is turning on right now, where this tension is, and where a situation is intensifying to the point that it can no longer, so to speak, go unnoticed. When it comes to the first house, it's always about a crisis of identity. It always concerns your outward image, how you present yourself to the world, how you perceive yourself in general, and how you try to show yourself to others. So this can be quite literal. Something related to your appearance, for example. You might suddenly feel an urgent desire to get a tattoo. By the way, this is actually one way to compensate, because if during the stationary periods you realize that nothing much is really changing in your life, but Pluto is moving through your first house, you need to do something externally so that it doesn't create some strange crisis situations. Because, for example, it could affect your health, and you don't want, God forbid, any kind of injury. So Pluto is like that. It's a rather intense planet, so you might accidentally pierce yourself, so go get a piercing or something, or change something about your appearance. If Pluto is currently transiting your second house, then some issue related to finances and resources might intensify. Debts could come to light, or there could be disputes regarding ownership of your money, sudden expenses, sudden income, sudden something like a new source of income suddenly being cut off, or on the contrary, appearing, anything related to money and resources. The third house could mean tensions with relatives, for example, or with neighbors, or some kind of acute situation. Something with your car, maybe even buying a car, or something breaking down that you'll have to fix. In other words, it's some kind of explosion in communication. It could mean a lot of interaction in public spaces. If you're a blogger, for example, you might, maybe some hater will show up and start putting pressure on you. So this is about some kind of conflicts, perhaps within your social circle, or it could be an urgent situation with documents, for example, with some paperwork, or something related to education. For instance, you might start some kind of intensive course. What I'm describing now could also be a kind of compensation, because when Pluto moves through a certain house, it creates these prolonged situations, and most likely it's pushing you towards something like that. If we're talking about the fourth house, it could be some kind of acute crisis, a tense situation in the family, such as a conflict with your parents, for example. So the topic of family and home becomes kind of complicated, emotional. Some family issues get aggravated. Some secrets might come out. Maybe some skeletons will fall out of the closet, right? So this is about separation. Maybe you'll have to leave the place where you are, like selling your house, for example, or when you leave the area where you live. Moving, yes. There could be a crisis in your relationship with your parents, so it's some kind of heightened situation. The fifth house is about children, business, buying and selling. What could happen here? There could be a major purchase, a significant sale, or a complete change of direction in business, for example, or it could be an intense situation with a child, parenting issues, if you have children. So this might be about needing to let your child go. By the way, that's also the fifth house. It's about relationships when some very passionate romances begin, when everything is boiling with passion and jealousy, when certain secrets are revealed, specifically with the person you are just starting a relationship with. These are quite tense relationships. They could even have some abusive tendencies. I don't know. Maybe the person starts to show certain behaviors. So pay attention. If you currently have Pluto in the fifth house and you're starting a relationship, pay close attention to how this person behaves. If this concerns children, then it's better to distance yourself from the child for a while to give them some freedom, so to speak. If this concerns business, then the whole situation requires change and transformation, a strict and complete shift in direction. Perhaps you need to change something. If we're talking about the sixth house, that's about health, routine, and how you organize, so to speak, your everyday actions. Maybe this concerns your job. Maybe it concerns, for example, if you work from home, a routine, everyday kind of thing. But nevertheless, it could also be an acute situation with colleagues, for example, or it could be a flare-up of some illness, say an acute inflammation of something, or when you suddenly fall ill, when you catch some virus. Since this planet is also responsible for viruses, you could catch an infection that makes you bedridden and, well, requires you to undergo effective treatment. With Pluto, you need to treat things very thoroughly. So, not just ignore it, not just sit there until you feel a bit better, or take a pill and suddenly feel relief. It doesn't work like that. Pluto always demands a deep approach. An acute situation with colleagues at work might arise so that you reflect on whether you even need to be in that team at all. So, pay attention to your health and to what's happening around you. Maybe you need to change some habits. Yes, maybe a health issue might flare up so that you completely change your daily routine so that your health in a way improves. The seventh house is about relationships, partnerships, friends, clients. In other words, these are people who might be adversaries, but open adversaries, those you know. So some situation like that could escalate. For example, a legal dispute, if you have one, could intensify, or a situation in your partnership with your husband or wife could become more acute, for instance. Usually during such periods, marriages, divorces, or very fateful encounters happen, when someone comes into your life and completely turns your worldview upside down, or communication with a person that completely changes the direction of your perception. That can also happen. Or a very acute situation with some kind of conflict, the kind that feels like it's about to explode and you'll just go your separate ways and so on. In other words, the situation in a partnership can really heat up. The eighth house is about everything that concerns other people, other people's money, other people's resources, not yours, not your own resources. So it could be debts, situations involving other people's money, inheritance, or some very intense energetic processes, when life throws you into a very acute situation, like a heated crisis begins, so that you can actually see where your problem lies. So the eighth house can, in principle, bring up or intensify some situation in your life that really should have been resolved a long time ago, but you just can't bring yourself to make a decision. And Pluto in the eighth house can create a situation so intense that it just suddenly resolves itself as if it dissolves on its own, thanks to, for example, relationships fall apart or you lose your job or something like that happens. But it's always for the better, always a plus. That's what I love about the eighth house. It takes away from us what we truly don't need. It might seem painful at first, but in reality, it's just divine grace. The ninth house is about a person's worldview, the way you think, your principles, what you believe in. It can also relate to education or travel. So there could be some acute crisis situation, for example, an exchange trip or a tough situation during a trip abroad, or when you're returning somewhere, moving, or something connected to a person who is an authority for you, some kind of dispute, for example. It's not about authority or power. It's just that someone, for example, a mentor, a teacher or some important person might appear in your life who will completely change your perspective. The ninth house is always about before and after, the effect of before and after. And so a situation might occur that completely transforms your outlook, your view of life. Basically, you used to think one way, but now you'll think completely differently. The 10th house creates crisis situations and tension at work, in your career, with your boss, or with the law. Here, it's specifically about legal matters. There could be, for example, a fine or some kind of investigation. It doesn't have to be a court case, but some sort of proceedings with people who are in positions of authority or power. There may be some pressure from the authorities, pressure from your boss. A very tense situation at work could arise, which will force you to change your approach, for example. This could mean getting fired, or on the contrary, the opposite. For instance, you might get hired for a job, but this job completely changes your usual life rhythm. It's a huge amount of work, a huge amount of responsibility. The 11th house is everything related to organized group. That is, there may be some kind of abrupt change. Your plans, yes, everything that concerns the future, and also some kind of tense situation within a group, for example, a conflict, or again, since the 11th house often relates to blogs, if you run your own blog, you might encounter someone who starts putting pressure on you there. In other words, you may feel some kind of pressure from society, from external factors specifically. It could be an overwhelming flow of information that suddenly comes at you, some news, something related to your plans, something you wanted. It's somewhere along those lines. And the 12th house is profoundly about the subconscious mind, about things like experiencing very intense and vivid dreams. You might frequently have trouble sleeping, that particular kind of persistent insomnia, when a significant amount of energy comes up during the nighttime hours, thereby creating considerable tension. You definitely need to express it. If you can't sleep, don't try to force yourself to fall asleep. Instead, try to be more active during this period, especially at night. And by the way, this is also when hidden enemies might surface. People you never even suspected could reveal themselves. Old things you thought you'd long forgotten, old fears, those subconscious things that seem to play no role in your life anymore. They can resurface now so that you can work through them. So these are some old triggers. Old triggers, especially those related to the 12th house, can often resurface. If you're abroad, there could also be some heightened or acute situation there. What's important for all houses and really for all situations is to understand that events can be crisis-like, of course, but Pluto's goal is not just to create a crisis for the sake of crisis, but rather it's important to remove what no longer works for you, you see. In other words, Pluto always clears things out so that something new can emerge. We know that in order for something new to appear, something old must be removed. You can't build something new on old energy. You can't build something new in a place that's already completely clogged up. That's why Pluto always clears things out. And regarding the house that Pluto passes through, Pluto, as I mentioned, can also affect a planet. That is, it can make aspects to planets and also bring up deep and powerful issues. So what might you encounter, for example, if Pluto makes an aspect to the moon? It's always about an emotional crisis. Some pain from the past may surface, issues related to family, something connected to your mother or maternal figures, but it's precisely through this that new emotional resilience is formed. It's a change of habits, it's a change of your worldview as well, yes. So it's not just about events happening at home or in some specific area, but in general, when Pluto touches the moon is in fact everything, really. You could talk endlessly about it. Its emotions, reactions, your behavior, work, family relationships, and basically where you live, your locality. All of this changes. Just imagine, it can even affect psychosomatics when there might be an aggravation of the gastrointestinal tract. That can also happen, yes, especially during such periods. So you need to look at the specific situation here, but the main task is to change some habit of yours, some reaction, basically your perception of how you are used to reacting to things, yes, and to change your behavioral pattern. The sun, if the sun is involved, it's always about a crisis of the self, a crisis of me, of my identity. So it's a situation where you feel that I can no longer be who I used to be. That is, I'm not the same, that's it, my old role, my perception of myself, it's as if it's dying off, that's it, things can't be the way they were anymore. Sometimes it's a career change, sometimes it's a change in status, sometimes it's a change in how you realize yourself, because your goals are changing, your desires are changing, what I want and how I see myself in this world overall. So it can affect the father figure or men in general. Men in general may go through this because the sun is responsible for male figures, and there may be some kind of transformation with these people. But the main point is to completely cleanse your self-perception, to totally change your self-esteem, to raise it, to increase your self-love, depending on what exactly is happening. If we're talking about Mercury, if Pluto touches Mercury, then the topics become more related to information. It could be about exams, negotiations, important documents, studies, or the way you process information when you want to dig deeper and get to the bottom of things. You might start to become intensely interested in something. There could be a lot of routine work involved. So here, we're dealing with matters specifically related to information. If it's Venus, it could mean a crisis in relationships or finances. It might be a desire to completely change your appearance. Well, not completely, like just a part of yourself, so to speak. Yes, transformations in your appearance and in relationships too, when there are some drastic changes happening, when there is either separation or, on the contrary, a sobering up, like, for example, breaking off a codependent relationship. That is when you completely change your pattern of behavior in relationships. And with money too, there could be, for example, some kind of crisis situation where you have to spend a lot, or when you, on the contrary, there might be some kind of influx depending on how Pluto is working in the chart. But the point is that these topics may be affected, and Mars, if Pluto touches Mars, then this is an intensification of certain conflicts. It's really a test of how well you can stand up for yourself. It's a huge energy, a powerful force when you just feel like you're being torn apart. This can be extremely intense emotional tension, a real strain. When you suddenly have so much energy, or you're loaded with work to the point where you just have to work at an incredibly high pace. And here it's important to accept this energy and not just lie on the couch, because if Pluto touches Mars and you just lie on the couch, that energy will be directed towards self-destruction. That's why it's extremely important here to channel it into action. I'm not considering other planets because they have a more collective influence, that is, they affect people in general, the world, countries, politics, and so on, as well as events in the chart. And since I can't see your chart, it would be very difficult if we started digging into those aspects right now. It's enough for us to consider the psychological influence and where Pluto is transiting through the houses. But if you want to understand this, if you want to figure out why a certain intense situation is happening in your life, what it's about, and what it affects, this is something that's very clearly visible. So, for example, you can come to me for a consultation or figure out how this works, how this mechanism is set up, how a natal chart actually shows what influences what. It's a very, very interesting chain. How do you work with Pluto's energy? The most important thing is not to resist. So if you feel that some kind of change is happening, if something is falling apart, you just need to understand that it's happening at the right time. Pluto, in a way, clears things out so that something new can come in. It can be painful. With Pluto, things are never easy, so it's always about some kind of nervous, maybe even breakdowns. It's an anxious state. It's basically about a crisis situation, meaning there's emotional tension, so you just need to prepare yourself for the fact that this period isn't forever. If something leaves, let it go. If something falls apart, let it fall apart. You just need to accept it, to learn to accept. Afterwards, it always makes us stop clinging to the old and look for where a new door is opening. It's important to know here that you can get stuck on the negative, or you can see where an opportunity is opening up to understand why the situation is happening. So the most important thing to remember is that Pluto doesn't take anything away that is still alive and that you need. In other words, it doesn't take away anything that works in your favor, you see? So if something falls away from your life, it clearly isn't bringing you anything good. October, of course, is quite a tough month for us because these deep processes are surfacing, coming to the forefront. And even though one planet is turning direct, it seems like it's like a real profound catharsis is truly happening. You might indeed feel a certain significant tension in your everyday life, but on the 24th, when the 24th day actually comes around, it will undoubtedly get much, much easier for you. I hope this video will be useful for you and that you will relax a bit regarding any tense situation, because the more we worry, the less we actually help ourselves. So you need to understand that if there is such a connection and you see that you have some kind of problem in your relationships, you see that Pluto is in the 7th house or is aspecting Venus, just let it go. Well, I hope this was helpful. I would be very grateful if you subscribe to my channel, because there will be analysis of upcoming transits and many, many more useful videos.